let's face it, all of us have been affected by the pandemic, whether it's as individuals, as families, as nations, and businesses. But not a lot of us think about how the pandemic has impacted on the world of conservation, which is obviously the world of peace parks. And that's what I want to drill down into a little bit further and understand. So what has happened? How has the COVID impacted your world at peace parks?
Thank you, Damien. And I think first of all to understand that all parks in Africa and conservation are entirely dependent on one of two sources of income. The one is donor money, and the other one is tourism. You want to develop these parks that eventually tourism becomes a sustainable revenue stream for these parks. And unfortunately, or so we thought, but unfortunately with COVID, I mean, that has now severely been impacted. I mean, you can imagine with tourism coming to a full stop really in March 2020, there's been zero income going to these protected areas. A year later, the IUCN did a study and they found that over half of all protected areas in Africa have been severely impacted as a result of COVID with income. And that means that they stopped with all of their activities to do anti-poaching, for example, and to protect wildlife. So half of all formal protected areas in the whole of Africa has been directly affected by COVID because it's dependent on tourism. So our journey has been a little bit less affected because we are rewilding and rebuilding these parks, and for us, sometimes tourism is only 5 or 10 years down the line. So fortunately, from that perspective, the impact has been less. But conversely, the impact on donor funding has been also quite significant. A lot of our work is to take donors to the field and to show them what we do. And with the traveling restrictions, I mean, I haven't had a single trip with a donor for the past 18 months already, which is unusual. And my calendar usually will be once or twice a month, if actually working with donor groups or donors or missions from these large development agencies coming to visit these parks. So the impact has been catastrophic, to be quite frank, and devastating in many protected areas.
It's really interesting hearing what you're saying, and I think you're opening my eyes to how it all works. I think I, like a lot of people, have this sense that peace parks or these conservation areas are effectively like a gated space where animals are allowed to run wild, and you don't think about it actually. A large part of the income coming from tourism is just not something that I'd factored in. I kind of thought that tourism would be bad for conservation, but it sounds like it's one of the fundamental pillars of how the whole process works. So if the tourism isn't coming in and the revenue isn't coming in, who gets affected by that most? What is the greatest impact of that?
Well, I mean, tourism is the backbone of any protected area, right? Any income in any protected area is tourism. That there's no other. If you think about it, what other income is there in a national park? You cannot generate income through timber harvesting or through hunting or through. I mean, that's the whole idea of a national park. It's zero consumptive utilization. It's non-consumptive. It's you can take a picture and you can leave a footprint, but that's it. That you want to keep these areas as pristine as possible. Now, with the virtual collapse of tourism because of COVID, the entire tourism sector is affected. Now, tourism is the world's largest employer, and the secondary and tertiary employers of tourism is vast. I mean, they often say for one international tourist to Africa, you actually have 8 people positively affected by it. So it's got a massive multiplication factor. So your whole supply chain, whether it's now your airlines, whether it's you can just imagine your food industry, your restaurants, your retail, your and not even talking about people employed in the tourism, in the lodges and the ranges, so I mean it's a massive impact. We in Africa we generate from 80% of anybody that goes to Africa because they want to see wildlife or they want to see landscapes, and they want to see the beautiful scenery, and that's a $48 billion annual industry. So it went from $48 billion to zero. So who was impacted the most? Everybody in the whole value chain of tourism.
It's extraordinary hearing how interconnected it all is. What have you at Peace Parks been able to do? I mean, how have you survived, and how have you been able to survive and work over this period?
We're fortunate we in many phases of park development we weren't too reliant on tourism. And we've got large development agencies with long implementation programs. So it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, sometimes even 10 years. So the impact hasn't been too immediate, but where the impact has been immediate is to people and to communities living in these landscapes. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. And in the African context, your employment is really in the urban environment and not the rural environment, your formal sector employment. So you have sort of a migration within the country or in the region where people work in cities and they send home money to their wives and family and children, or the women send home to the money home if it's a wife, but a woman. But the point is there's significant revenue streams generated in the urban environment that sustains the rural environment. Now, a lot of these people in the cities had lost their jobs and they went home. So you had a situation of thousands of people going home without any income and back to their rural environment. So that's been pretty tough on hundreds and thousands of people. So our response was, how do we help them? First of all, how do you help them with just health? Because that's the most important thing that you wanted to do, is you want to keep people from contracting COVID. So what can we do to help with that, to prevent that? And we passed the hat around to donors. We ourselves pitched in money, and the most incredible donor that came to the party was the German government through the German Development Bank, KfW, and they came forward with €6 million as a donation for the 3 TFCA sites, 3 of the 4 that we are focusing a lot of our attention, and that's really been incredible. Because with that and with many other donors, one could immediately then proceed to procure masks, and we at that stage there weren't any masks in Africa. I mean, so where do you get it from? You import it. So we imported container loads of masks and distributed that. And then secondary, we helped women, small little in communities, start making material masks. So we imported about 200,000 masks and distributed that, and then helped women to start making those masks themselves in small little businesses. We, for example, did quite a bit to distribute soap and sanitizers. If I look at my statistics here, we've distributed about 4.5 tons of sanitizer and some 44 tons of soap. So that goes all to the communities. But in total, we've directly supported about 240,000 people in the past year that live in and around these parks. But that wasn't all. The health is the one part of it, but what about the livelihood? So we, through the support from the German government, also started a cash for work program. And people living in these landscapes and around these parks were then employed on a temporary basis, not on a high remunerated positions, but just to say, here's some sort of income and there's dignity maintained, because it's not a handout. It's a remunerated position, and in the last year we cleared thousands of kilometers of roads and fixed fences and cleared open tracks and those type of things through this cash for work program and we had at a stage about 2,000 people fully employed through this program. So it was a wonderful initiative, and I think that it's just absolutely remarkable how the German government has stepped up and still keeping to support. So that's what we've done is we focused on the people, but it doesn't mean that we neglected what's happening in these parks. So wildlife conservation went ahead. These parks still were protected, and it wasn't an either or. It was just that, listen, the focus has to be people. It cannot now just only be wildlife. Not that it ever was, but we have to put extra effort into to look at the health and the safety aspect of people living in these landscapes around these parks.
It's lovely, isn't it, when you hear the stories of how people have come together, governments, donors have come together to help people just for the good of helping. It's really gratifying to hear. Tell me, in this time when people were losing jobs or losing their lifestyle, did that lead to an increase in poaching activity? Was there a cause and effect issue there, and was that a problem?
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, with a lot of people being unemployed, one saw a escalation of poaching. Now, we look at poaching in two distinct categories. There's what we have a zero tolerance for, and that is killing animals for profit. That's got nothing to do with survival. That's just greed. And then there's people killing animals because they're trying to it's a sustenance for food, right? It's protein, and that's totally two different worlds. And I think we were dealing with the latter mostly in the COVID pandemic. So that means a soft gloves approach, and rather looking at alternatives, rather looking at it's still against the law. You can't go into a park and kill an animal and put up snares. So you still have to do your job and uphold the law and stop that from happening. But it's not as if you then arrest people and throw them in jail. You just say, let's rather help you to see what alternatives there are. And that's also where the Cash for Work program then really kicked in. And once that kicked in, you did see a dramatic drop in this type of subsistence poaching, which is the biggest indicator is usually the placement of wire snares in the bush. So it's a noose that people put into gaps where animals usually walk, and these little footpaths of wildlife. So they put it in the footpath, and it's a noose with a wire tied to a tree. Animal walks through it, and then it catches it around the neck, and then basically it dies of starvation or suffocation, and that's a horrible, horrible death. So you don't want to have that happen in any situation. And in a park like Zenarf National Park, where you would average about 300 snares a month before COVID happened, suddenly it was 1,300 snares a month. So it was a massive ramp up, but like I said, then a massive drop again when the Cash for Work program kicked in and the donor community started stepping up. So in the end, in none of the parks where we are actively operating on the ground, we've saw any significant loss of wildlife. So it hasn't been catastrophic, but I think we've been fortunate and we've been really, really lucky. And it's not the case everywhere. In the case where there wasn't that type of long-term donor support, where tourism did collapse, where patrols did stop, where people didn't have any other substance, wildlife has been hit hard.
Hopefully, the COVID restrictions are lifting and tourism will return. And with that will come, new revenue streams or old revenue streams returning. How are you at Peace Parks gearing up for that new world, or the old world coming back, as it were?
Even before COVID, we realized that we have to diversify the income stream. It cannot be solely reliant on donor money and on tourism. You cannot sustain parks. So we've been really working hard and created an innovative conservation finance division in Peace Parks to look at what other income can be generated that is more of a transactional nature to unlock private sector to come to the party. Whether it's now carbon credits, which is of course a massive revenue generator and steadily increasing at the moment, and we've got an extremely good partnership with a company called Biocarbon Partners, and together with them supported the creation of the largest red community-based forest conservation program in the world of 1 million hectares. And we're expanding that now over the next decade to about 8 million hectares. So, and in this first program run by Biocarbon Partners, there's 160,000 people directly employed. So you do want to have more of transactional type of mechanisms for finance conservation. In this case, carbon credit is the transaction. The communities protect the forest directly. They own those forests. They're empowered to protect those forests. They're paid to do it. And on the other hand, somebody benefits because they are, equalizing their carbon emissions. So it's a wonderful win-win transaction. It's not a handout. It's a business transaction. So I think a lot more of that has to happen in the future of conservation. In our space, in protected areas, we are thinking of biodiversity tokens or biodiversity credits. Why not? Because these are ecosystem services. These parks are the lungs of the world. They're the pollinators of the world. They provide water for. I mean, in Nico National Park in Malawi, we work. This particular park provides 10% of all the water to Lake Malawi. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you start understanding how many people are dependent on Lake Malawi, which is in the region of 15 to 20 million people, 10% of the water that goes from one park suddenly becomes a serious ecosystem service. So I think the future of conservation will be to diversify your income stream. Yes, we're gearing up for tourism. That's for us a long-term strategy. It's a backbone funding revenue stream, but it's critical to diversify income, and by doing it through innovative mechanisms that enables people to not only hand money out, which a lot of people don't like, because what's the business case? And if I give money today, I probably have to give money again tomorrow and probably next year as well. People don't like that. It seems like this is never-ending. Obviously, our models are about not having that happen, but sometimes it just takes a very long time. So how we're gearing up for tourism is, yes, let's keep on to create spectacular parks in Africa, but let's also work very hard on innovative conservation financing models.
I find it really quite inspirational and hopeful, the breadth of the areas that you are looking at and the really innovative attitude that you've taken there. How can people, a lot of people are going to watch this video, how can people help? How can they contribute? How can they engage businesses or individuals? What kind of things can we do to help make a difference?
Well, what I've come across quite often is people feel helpless. They want to do good, and they don't know how. And they also feel, a lot of the times I get the response, but I don't have a lot of money. How can I possibly make a difference? Because the only thing that people usually can do is give money, right? To organizations like Peace Parks and many others that do such fantastic work. But I think my message is that every cent counts in conservation, and if you only have £10, give it, because with £10, I can employ somebody for a full day, and that person can sustain an entire family of 8 people. So sometimes you think £10 or $10 or whatever is not a lot of money, but in our world, it is a lot of money. So even a little amount goes a long, long way. And I think that's probably the obvious first thing that one can do. And then secondly, become an ambassador, become an activist, become involved, subscribe to these channels, spread the word of an organization like Peace Parks. If you go into peaceparks.tv and you share what we do, that helps us. So you don't even have to give a single cent, but you can contribute by sharing, by commenting, and by being actively involved. And that costs you nothing, it costs you your time.
Werner, I just want to end with one, just can you tell me one of the most uplifting or interesting or something that touched you over the last year or so at Peace Parks while we've gone through this period, which has been, let's face it, it's been tough for everybody. It sounds like it's been particularly tough for the world of conservation and Peace Parks.
Well, I think there's 2 stories that come to mind immediately with that question. And the first one is just how proud I am of our team and how the Peace Parks staff have just embraced change, which I hope they would, because that's so constant in our lives, isn't it? That's the only constant that we have. Embracing how we need to adapt, embracing that we have to step up a gear, have to change the way you do things, have to go into areas where you don't feel comfortable, have to really embrace this new crazy world. And I've been extremely proud to see how the team has rallied, in support of one another, and have embraced change. So that's quite touching for me. And where you used to have a meeting face to face, and now every Monday morning, we've got a 15-minute stand up, and everybody's there. Just say hello, have a great week, and off you go. We never did that before, so it's nice, isn't it? And then last year, in mid-COVID, we still kept to most of the, well, not most of it, but some of the rewilding programs. So where you move animals from areas where there's a lot to these parks that we are rehabilitating, and one of these activities or actions were to move back the first hyena. Hyena is not the nicest looking animal. It's a carnivore. It's a scavenger. For those who don't know how a hyena looks like, but it's such a vital part of the ecosystem, because they really ensure a healthy environment. If an animal dies, they're the ones that opens up the carcass and starts feeding on the carcass and allows for vultures and other scavengers to come in and clean up the veld, right? So we moved these 4 hyena from a park where there were quite a bit of them to Zanarf National Park where there haven't been hyena for the last 50 years. And what was touching for me is, seeing this 4 little hyena going into this vast wilderness now. We released them in there. And lo and behold, early this year, I think about February, the first pup has been born. And it sort of just was a reset button, just think about where these animals were persecuted, killed out, completely extinct. And we gave them a small little window, a small little chance. And they jumped back immediately. And that's for me the message, probably the positive message, is that nature does jump back. Nature does recover extremely well and extremely quickly if you give it a little chance. And COVID has given nature a little chance again. We've realized that we cannot go on doing what we've been doing. We cannot treat wildlife and animals like we have been treating it, and we have to change our ways. So there's a massive positive, and I think the world will change inevitably, where respect for all life on Earth and this harmony between nature and people will become the main way of life. I think COVID has been the first massive shakeup. So for me, that's the real positive that I take out of this, is that with this massive shakeup, and unfortunately there will be more, but we are quicker, not slower, quicker transitioning to a life and a world in balance, which is obviously where we need to be.
Werner, as inspirational as ever, really heartwarming and actually full of hope. So it's been an honour to talk to you and get your insights and to understand much more about this world. Thank you very, very much for your time, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Damien. I really appreciate it.